Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and I am particularly excited for today's conversation. Now, I know people say, Chris, you say that for all your guests, and of course I do, because I love all the guests that give their time to join us, but I am particularly excited for today. Miss Rachelle Cantero is with Civic. Tell me again, it's Civic Plus. She's a solutions engineer too with Civic Plus. You had a 15 plus year career as what I'll call a civil servant in local government. And you did something crazy. You decided to jump into pre-sales. And I think the last time we talked, you're like, Chris, that was like 37 minutes ago. And yet here you are. I'm very excited. And I'll explain to people why I invited you. But before we get into that, Rachelle, welcome. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, Chris. A little nervous, but that's okay. You've had some really amazing guests here lately, and I'm super honored that you wanted to have me here today to be in the same group as your past guests. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I am absolutely delighted to have you. And I have a feeling that there are going to be people saying to me in future episodes, that Rachelle, she's a tough act to follow. So don't put me on after her. So Rachelle, do you mind? So I introduced you very briefly, but do you mind sort of introducing yourself a little bit more broadly? Where is your career taking you? And then how did you make the decision to get into pre-sales?
Well, Chris, I was in local government for 17 years. I served in the state, municipal, and local levels of government. And I got into government because I really wanted to serve my community. Yeah. And I never thought ever in a million years that I would leave civil service. And then I got this very interesting DM in my LinkedIn from the lovely Carolyn Crafton about this intriguing position at Civic Plus as a solutions engineer, and the rest is history. And now I'm here.
And now, when you got this, invitation to consider being a solutions engineer, did you have any idea what the role was, what the role involved?
Not a one.
Not a clue. Not a clue. So when you started asking, like, how was the position? I'm actually really curious. How was the position sort of, or the role explained to you or positioned to you? Was it positioned as a sales role? Was it positioned as more of like a consulting type of role?
It was presented to me as more of like a consultant type of role. And I was told that my experience with the Civic Plus products is really what drew me to this. This is why the recruiter wanted to reach out to me, because I had some extensive experience with Civic Plus products.
Yeah.
And being a communication specialist prior to coming over to the private sector, I had a lot of experience with different systems. So I thought it was definitely to get more into the technical side.
Okay. Now, when you say you were a communication specialist, help me understand what exactly does that mean?
Well, Chris, a whole bunch of things, actually. I was hired to do website administration and social media management, okay. But I ended up doing amazing things like putting together a hot dog eating contest. I once had to establish a traffic pattern for an event.
Interesting.
Yes, all of that. I shot 6 commercials for some businesses in our uptown area. So the job, they really dug into and leaned into the other duties as assigned. Part of my job.
So really in that role, it sounds like you had a very dynamic role. You were doing lots of different things. You were involved in problem solving. So really, you were doing a lot of things that sales engineers do, right? You just didn't realize that you were actually doing many of the things that we do as sales engineers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think government prepared me really, really well
Yeah.
for the challenges and the tasks of being a solutions engineer.
Now, one of the things that has impressed me the most about you is just how quickly you've, frankly, created a bit of a name for yourself, for lack of a better term. I got to know you, or you and I met through LinkedIn. I think you posted something about my book, and then you reached out, you invited me to speak to one of your groups. So you've done a very good job of creating some brand awareness for yourself. Is that something that you did in your previous roles?
I did not. I was actually very hesitant to establish a professional brand on LinkedIn, being a civil servant, because if I posted something that didn't sit well with the audience, it could mean something negative. It could mean negative feedback for the organization that I worked for. So I was definitely hesitant, and plus LinkedIn, I always thought of as it's a platform for people who are looking for jobs, and I was never going to leave. I was never going to leave government. I wasn't looking for jobs, so I wasn't nearly as involved in it. And then when I moved onto the private sector, I realized how important it is to develop a professional brand. And starting off in a new field, I was 44 when I accepted this position as a solutions engineer. So I'm older, Gen X, and establishing that professional brand became more important to me because, heaven forbid I get let go from my current position. So at least I have something to kind of lean on, having that professional brand existing already on LinkedIn. And I believe the post that that started it all is this one.
Yes.
Well,
of course, I have to give you props for holding the book. But you're right. I think you posted something about. I think you guys were doing a book club, maybe, and you posted about it, and I responded. And look, I give you a great deal of credit. I mean, there are a lot of people who have probably started, in the pre-sales profession, probably about the same time you have, that certainly haven't garnered my attention or the attention of the community, and you have. So I give you a great deal of credit, and there's a lot to be learned from that. So let's I want to pick this apart a little bit. So you get this LinkedIn message from a recruiter. Yeah. Maybe you're on somebody's list as a power user or someone that they're familiar with at Civic Plus, and you start to unpack a little bit. What was it that convinced you that maybe this is a role that I would succeed in, and be interested in?
So two reasons, Justin Hammond and Jillian Algieri. So those are the hiring managers, and those are the managers of solutions engineers.
Okay.
When I finally got in front of them during the interview process, it was like, how could I not want to work with these people? So they had such a passion for the field, and also a great respect for the organization that they worked for. After I talked to them, it was like, if I don't get this job, I think I might die. I know, a little dramatic, but yeah, like after talking to them, I was like, yes, whatever it takes. What do I need to do? That was the next, that was my question, is how do I become a part of this team?
Yeah. And what about the job was so intriguing to you? I mean, aside from that they're both impressive, people, and spoke passionately about the company, what was it about the job that drew you to it?
Well, the fact that that I would still continue to serve government. I would still be able to serve my community, just in a different way. And that really spoke to my heart, was the fact that I would still be able to serve. And, you and I, our first conversation, you said to sell is to serve. And I'm really learning that now. And I'm finding so much fulfillment in this position.
It's so powerful. And I may have said this in one of our one of our chats, and what you just said is the key, right? We are most fulfilled when serving other people. And you're right. I mean, in this role, we do have the opportunity to serve great numbers of people, particularly when done well. So those words resonate with me a great deal. What trepidations or concerns did you have going into it sounds like they did a pretty good job of selling you on the role, right? But you must have had some concerns, some uncertainties making this
Yeah.
change.
Oh, of course. I mean, having been in local government for 17 years and being really proud of the work that I've done there, and having built a really good professional reputation within my community.
Sure.
The thought of having to rebuild that, going back to zero, like I had no credibility with anybody. My new teammates didn't know how I worked. So having to, just like the thought and really the fear of not being able to build that trust within the Civic Plus organization was what was really, really scary for me.
Yeah. And did you find that you were, quote, going back to zero, or did you find that really those relationships and that experience really put you at a certain level when you made that shift?
Chris, you talk about relationship management in your book, and I was completely unprepared by how much relationship management is involved with solutions engineering. So not just managing your relationships with a client, but managing your relationships with the AE team, really anybody that's involved within the sales process. And that's one thing that government did absolutely prepare me for, is building those relationships, building that trust. And I got a really nice test of that during COVID when nobody trusted government. So, making sure I'm delivering really great message points, making sure my presentation is tight, making sure I'm delivering value. That's all part of it. That's all part of relationship management. That's not just part of being like this wonderful solutions engineer, getting to know the product and showing that product well, but also managing how you interact with people.
It's going out of the way. What I hear you saying is you take the time to care, you take the time to put forth the effort that shows that you care about the clients you're dealing with, the sales counterparts you're dealing with, et cetera, right? It shows pride in your work. Rachelle, allow me to just push our own pause button here for a moment, folks. I'm speaking with Rachelle Cantero. Am I saying that right? Cantero?
Cantero, yes.
Cantero. Okay, I just want to make sure. She is a solutions engineer 2. Got to make sure you give you the 2 Civic Plus. And we're talking about making the transition. Rachelle, one of the things that's so inspiring for me, and you mentioned a moment ago, you were 44 when you made the change, not entirely unlike my story. I was 15 years into an IT consulting enterprise architecture career before I made the jump into pre-sales, and I was in my late 30s. I mean, it felt like a mid-career change for me as well. So, to me, the message for anyone out there who may be 15 or more years into a career, right, and yet they're wondering, might there be something else? Yeah. I think you're living proof that you can make the change and be very, very successful. Now, you said one of the things that surprised you was the importance of relationships. Yes. What are some of the other surprises that you've sort of uncovered in your first, let's call it 6 months, 6, 7, 8 months in this profession?
The onboarding process has been like quite amazing. My leaders will talk something like, we'll say stuff like drinking from a fire hose. And there's definitely a difference between, I guess, private sector fire hoses and government fire hoses, because I really found it so easy to manage the fire hose at Civic Plus that in my previous government jobs. Just, the training aspect of this position I thought was like top notch. There's so much in government that you kind of have to figure out on your own as well.
Yeah.
So not all, over here, in the private sector with Civic Plus, I felt like I was set up for success, right? Here are the resources. You're going to practice these skills. Before we put you in front of clients, we got to make sure that you tick off these boxes. Plus, probably one of the most amazing conversations I've had with my leaders is, where do you want to go from here? You started as a solutions engineer. What's your path forward?
Wow.
So that's amazing. Like having somebody actually just say, I know you just started, but you must have goals. What are those?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. But by the way, Rachelle, my good friend Brian Lewis has chimed in. Brian runs Home Run pre-sales, and he's been on this show as well. Brian, it's good to see you. By the way, if any of you are out there, we don't see who's out there. So if you care to say hello to Rachelle or myself, or care to ask any questions, please do so. Alvin, he's chiming in. Same boat. Worked 14 years in IT on the customer side, then made the leap. Been an SE for 8 years now. Alvin,
very nice.
He tunes in regularly. Alvin, it's good to see you, my friend. Thanks for saying hello. So Rachelle, I know the onboarding process has been incredible. They've given you the resources. They've given you training. There must have been some butterflies the first time you actually had to go out in the field and either give your first demo, have your first client meeting. Talk a little bit about that experience. What has it been like to actually get out in front of customers, and how quickly did you, and are you still in the process of, sort of finding your sea legs, as I like to say?
Yeah, well, I serve government. I was in government for 17 years, and the product I support is specifically made for municipal clerks. And I served as a deputy clerk for 4 years. So getting in front of clerks has been nostalgic for me. But my first demo with a clerk, I had gone through my presentation, and one thing that I promised myself, Chris, when I came, before I went live, before I was set out into the wild as a solutions engineer, was that I didn't want to do a canned demo for any of our clients, because I got sold to a lot. And I would sit there and be like, you can give this presentation to anybody. And I promised myself that I just didn't want to do that. So I customized this demo for this clerk, and she was a clerk for a very long time, like seriously, like longer than I've been alive. And like really, like for a very, very long time. And I'm going through the solutions with her, and she, she's writing her notes. And, I asked her, she's writing her notes. I'm like, so what do you think of this so far? And she looked up at me and said, I really don't know I haven't seen how this helps me. And, I just saw your video with Chris Bogue, right, on improv. And I think the best thing about improv is being able to pivot.
Yeah.
So when you get trained to be a solutions engineer, you are given steps. This is what you do. When this happens, this is what you do. And sometimes you just have to kind of improv an answer to something like that. Totally. And Chris, I told this clerk, like, okay, let's start over. Tell me a little bit more about your process. There's obviously something that I missed. And let's start again. And she was gracious enough to start over with me. And I kind of reworked my demo. She gave me a couple of minutes to do that. And that was my first demo ever. And it resulted in a CW. So
Wow.
okay, won. So we won that deal.
Wow. That, I have to say, that is a great story. Well, and honestly, the first thought is that's something that only a seasoned pre-sales professional could do. Is, first of all, the fact that you paused and said, is this resonating, right? How are we tracking here, right? And then she sometimes they won't even, a customer won't give you an honest feedback, right? And say, well, I mean, it's okay, right? And then you've got nothing, but she actually gave you some honest feedback, which that alone tells me that she felt comfortable enough to say, yes, indeed, actually, I don't see. But then you pivoted and turned, right? And you're right. Improv, what do? We work with whatever they give us.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. I recently worked with a clerk, and I was showing her, I was showing her a certain way to do something, and she was very hesitant about it. I can tell by her demeanor, her voice. She wasn't exactly liking what I was suggesting. So I'm like, give me a number from 1 to 10. 1 being you want to get off this call. 10 means you are ready to go in front of counsel to buy this product. Where are you at? And she said at 5. She's like, I'm at a 5 with this. I don't know if this is for me. And that feedback was so helpful so that I can show her the product in another way that's more meaningful to her.
So love that.
And, when I get feedback like that, I just draw on my previous experience as a deputy clerk. And when I go into a meeting in front of a client, I mention I was in local government in 17 years for those as a clerk.
Yeah.
And I used to create meeting materials by hand. And I get so geeked out by the solution that I want to show it this way. And it doesn't always resonate. So, and it's not about me, right? It's about the client. It's about this meeting. So it's it's having the confidence and the skill to just shift, show the product in a way that's most meaningful to that clerk that you're presenting to.
Yeah. Well, and you said so many important things there. One of which is it's not about me, right? Like we have to be willing to abandon our agenda and abandon our plan when we realize that actually the plan's not going particularly well, right? And it's not about us forcing our ideas on people. It's really about sincerely trying to find what are the challenges or problems, or are there areas that we can help them or not, right? And being at peace with the fact that we may not be able to help them. And you're right. I think look, having, arguably 20 plus years of just professional experience before, the truth is you've been selling for years. You just haven't been selling software, but
it's true.
You've been selling your ideas, right?
When, in government, in politics, campaigning is selling, right? It's marketing. They just call it, you're selling a person, you just call it a campaign, on the politics side. Yeah. So, I didn't realize that until I came over here on the private sector.
That's awesome. Rachelle, I need to pause just for a moment again, because we've got quite a few people weighing in. Stephen French is showing you some love. Rachelle rocks. Ryan Ludy. Ryan, nice to see you. Thanks for chiming in. She is an excellent guest. Matt Davis, 10 years as a retail small business owner, closing COVID, transition to pre-sales for a company selling an EA tool. That's my background, by the way, Matt. Enterprise architecture. Scary transition. You're right. Matt, it's good to see you. Thanks for chiming in. Sean Brady, hello, Rachelle, sending you some teammate appreciation. And Brian liked your story. So let's talk a little bit more about you've developed quite a passion for this role and for this profession. And I know it goes beyond just what you're able to do, obviously, with Civic Plus. Talk a little bit about sort of what you've learned and what you've discovered about this profession, the community in this profession, et cetera.
That sales is not a 4-letter word. It is something so fulfilling, and we are doing some really great work over there at Civic Plus. Want to give a shout out back to Sean and Steven. So when I first came to Civic Plus, Sean was my SE buddy. Again, just part of the great training that I received included Sean. And then when Steven joined our team, Steven is a former civil servant himself, served as a clerk for 25 years. I was his buddy. So, so Chris, like that domino effect. I got this great training from Sean. So of course I need to show up for Steven and give him the best training. But Steven's like top notch. So it's just so great to see also a former civil servant on the team with me, on the team with me as well.
What are some of the things that, if any, that you're struggling with? So we've talked a lot about the goodness. You've had some early success. You've made this transition very, very quickly. You've gotten a great deal of support from the organization, training, resources. Are there things that you find yourself thinking, you know what, I still have some work to do, or I still find this challenging? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, that continual management of my relationship with the account executives, just making sure that I'm like providing continuous value to that team. Same thing with EAMs, enterprise account managers, that they feel comfortable using me. There are times when I get like a little bit, am I coming off insecure because I'm asking questions like, how did that go? Can you give me some feedback? Can you give me some notes on the presentation, on the meeting? Because I just want to make sure that if I'm going to take time away from managing their relationship with the client, all right? So they really are, they're giving me their time with the client to close this deal, that they find it valuable.
Yeah. You mentioned asking questions. Do you get involved in discovery? Is discovery a big, talk a little bit about that. What are some of the things you've learned and as a result of maybe either mistakes or things that have worked in the context of discovery?
Yes, I love sitting in on discoveries. So I usually am just a fly on the wall when it comes to discoveries I observe. And a part of it is sitting there and listening to clerks or other staff members kind of describe their process. And it's like, did you catch that? Like, that's a problem in their workflow. That's a problem in their approval process, right? So there is like a different language. I feel like, civil servants do talk a certain way.
Yeah.
And sometimes, it's like being able to pick up like those little nuances that's going to make a big impact on the demo stage. So that's why I sit there and I listen and I take a lot of notes. I love being a part of the discovery process. Yeah.
Well, and you touched on something that I think is important, and it's actually worth double clicking on. Something that I talk a lot about in some of the workshops I run is when we think about our role in discovery, I compare it to a definition of IQ that I heard a number of years ago. And the definition of IQ that I heard, in fact, the way this gentleman explained it, he said, let's say, for example, there's someone with a high baseball IQ and a low baseball IQ. If they were to watch a game together, what is it that makes the person with the higher baseball IQ different? The ability to make finer distinctions.
Yes.
That's our role in discovery, is the ability to make finer distinctions. To your point about what they're trying to do with their process, right? There's certain nuances that we as quote experts will pick up that maybe our sales counterparts won't, right? So that ability to make those finer distinctions, I think, is so critical. And clearly someone who's been in the profession for 17 years, right, has the ability to do. Now, do you find that once you've involved, participated in discovery, does it typically then transition at some point into some sort of demonstration, some sort of presentation? Is it usually done sort of in the same meeting, or is there sort of multiple meetings? Talk us through a little bit in terms of that process.
I love our current process right now with, different, scheduling 2 different meetings for a discovery and then the demo. Giving us the time, giving me the time with the client, getting to sit in during discovery is invaluable. We have great AEs and EAMs that take great notes, but we do listen. We do hear different things as SEs, as former civil servants. So being there, being physically there and listening, tremendous. And then we do schedule a subsequent meeting for that demo. So I can sit with the sales rep and we kind of come up with a strategy. What did you hear? What should I touch on the most from what you heard? This is what I heard. So this is what I would like to touch on. I want to emphasize this function during our demonstration. And I think when I show this, it's going to make a big splash because I heard this. So giving us the time to strategize that way has been so helpful. And then just knock it out of the park during that demo stage.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is you're thinking through what I call the aha moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
We heard this, so if we show this, that's where it should, right? That's where it should pop. So I love that. By the way, Justin, I hope I'm saying it right. Hammond has tuned in. SE involved in discovery is an invaluable resource beyond knowing the product. Well said, Justin. Nice to see you, by the way. So let's talk about demos a little bit. So you've done some discovery. You're doing some prep, some planning. You're thinking through what you're going to do in a demonstration. Have you, first of all, have you had any demos yet that have just sort of gone off the rails a little bit?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. I had this demo. I still get triggered by this experience, Chris.
A little PTSD.
Yeah, a little bit. So I was showing them. I was showing them Civic Clerk, and I had not been privy to any discovery notes prior to this time, and I went through 40 minutes of the demo and the presentation, and the clerk finally said, "Rachelle, thank you so much for this demonstration, but this is not what I wanted to see." They actually wanted to see like a completely different product. Super embarrassing. And at that time, all we can do is thank the client for being so gracious. Also, because this is so typical of clerks to be, so polite and give you the time to like get to your point, right? Because that's still a service-based profession.
Yeah.
She's going to get to her point. I know she's going to get to her point. And then she gave me 40 minutes before she's like, I don't think you're going to get to the point. So absolutely the best thing we could have done. Thank the team for getting together, apologize for the misunderstanding, and schedule another meeting so that they could see that proper product. But yeah, that was like, so that was earlier. I can't say early in my career because I'm,
You're still early in your career, but that was in the infancy. We'll call it the infancy.
Yes.
So in hindsight, and by the way, thank you for sharing that story. That is a good story. By the way, we have all been there. I wish I could say that I haven't, but even from time to time, I get on meetings and it we're 20 or 30 minutes in before I realize we're sort of doing this right now. In hindsight, what would you have done differently for that specific scenario? Is there anything you would have done differently, either before the meeting, even started, or maybe when the meeting started? Or was there any point where maybe you could have produced a different result?
Yeah, absolutely. Since I had not been part of that discovery call, and I had minimal contact with the AE at the time, performing a little bit of discovery in the beginning.
Yeah.
would have, maybe they still would have let me ramble on, but not 40
Maybe.
minutes. And I probably would have not rambled on for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And come up with the solution of, okay, we just need to schedule you for another meeting because I'm not prepared
Yeah.
to show you
Yeah.
this product.
Yeah.
And just being also like being open and
Mm.
honest about that, being on this side and having been on that side, right?
Yeah.
Being the one being sold to. I if there I've never been hesitant to say I made a mistake or that I don't think this is what you wanted to see. And being open about that, being honest about that
Yeah.
really has improved really my even just within that hour,
Yeah.
disarming the client
Mm.
and making it more of a conversation as opposed to a presentation, like being honest about mistakes like that and missteps.
Yeah. It's so powerful. I mean, the more open, to use your term, honest, transparent, and it's disarming. At the end of the day, that's when we are and come across the most authentic. Because the truth is we're not perfect. That's as much as we'd like to believe sometimes that we are. We're not perfect. The software isn't perfect, right?
Right.
And I don't think most people, I'd like to say all, but most people don't expect perfection, right? And so I think it comes across more human. At the end of the day, people buy from people. So I think those are very, very, very valuable words. And by the way, I think we all have to experience some of those failures in this profession, right?
Yeah.
I could tell you, Rachelle, look, when you get out there, make sure you set expectations up front and make sure everybody's on the same page, right? And you would hear those things and you'd nod your head just like you're doing, and it would make perfect sense. But until you've experienced the pain and you learn from, it's kind of like falling, you sort of have to fall off the bike yourself to realize what it feels like to fall, right? And then you're like, okay, I am going to correct that behavior and that action. So very well. Again, Rachelle, let me push our own pause button, folks. I'm speaking to Rachelle Cantero. She's a solutions engineer too with Civic Plus. She's been in this profession for about about eight, let's call it 8 months. Has become a very quick study of the profession, has created some content on LinkedIn, is incredibly enthusiastic about the profession and excited to be here. Rachelle, what advice? I call this tech sales advice for a reason. We want to give people some advice. What advice would you give? Let's start with people who are maybe just starting in the profession. Maybe they've been in the role for a month or two. What advice would you give for that individual?
Mirror the language that your client is using. So if you are in a discovery process and they're using words like, it's chaotic when, I hate it when the product does this quirky thing. There's a hiccup. Every time I do this, there's a hiccup. So on the demo side, you're using word quirky, chaotic. So make sure that you're mirroring that language. And words absolutely matter in a demo environment. So they're giving you the script already, so use it. Another advice is something that's worked for me is I don't ever mention like any other product or competitor or anybody during a demo. So that time is between Civic Plus and that client and nothing else. There are no other products in that hour and a half. It's just me and the client and we're discussing things. I even go so far as to, with your current product, you have this problem. I don't mention anything by name. Chris, I kind of liken this like practice to like not mentioning your ex on a first date, right? I don't mention any other products, your current product. And I use words, I always tie the word solution to our product. So the solution is this with Civic Clerk, because how you position the product absolutely matters in that presentation. And this is something, and Chris, you've already proven my point here. Also using like your hook words, right? Your hook words. For me, it's automation and flexibility. But in my professional life, I sign off all my emails with enthusiasm. And I don't think you'd be surprised that when people describe me, they will use the words enthusiastic and kind of work in enthusiasm. So also giving people a script for you and your product is also very, very helpful. So yeah, so Chris, you've called me enthusiastic. Is that a word that you picked out yourself, or maybe did I give you that word?
I mean, it could be a little bit of both. I mean, you know, and look, maybe it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right? I mean, I think the more you say that, right, then the more you behave that way and act that out, right? So I think that's really good. By the way, I said, what advice would you have for someone new into the profession? I honestly think that was advice for anybody in the profession, regardless of how long you've been in the role. That was some pretty good stuff. And I'm going to double click on a few of the things that you just said. You mentioned use their words, right? They're going to give you the script. And I absolutely love that, right? If they talk about chaos, talk in your demo, talk about how, you know, we're trying to avoid chaos here, right? If they talk about the hiccups, say, you know, we're trying to avoid having hiccups at the wrong time, right? And by the way, the other thing I look for is what I call the, you know, the emotional words, right? The words that indicate some sort of, you know, some sort of emotional driver there, right? The emotional hooks. You also mentioned the importance of words. I think we need to be very intentional with the words that we use. In fact, I'll go further. It's almost all we have.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a product. Most products don't sell themselves. And those that do are called, that's product-led growth. And you can download that from the website and start using it, right? If you're a sales engineer and you're doing demos, more than likely that product's not going to sell itself. The only thing we have is our words. So very, very, very powerful there, Rachelle. But by the way, Matt chimed in again. He too loved this idea of mirroring, and you're right. I mean, look, if you listen and pay attention and are sincerely interested and curious, and they feel as though you care, right? If they feel as though you're interested, they feel as though and they trust your motives. They, of course, being the clients, they're far more likely to open up. They're far more likely to tell you what's really going on, what they're really looking for. And if we sincerely are willing to say, actually, you know what? I'm not sure our solution's a good fit for you, right? Then there's almost nothing we can't say in this profession. And I absolutely love that. Rachelle, I asked you, what would you say to someone who's new? What about people maybe who aren't in this profession? Maybe there are other people who may listen to this video who are in government, local or state government like yourself, or maybe IT, like our friend, you know, Matt, or Matt may have been the small business owner, but you know, someone who's not in this profession, who's sort of looking in from the outside and wondering, what might you say to any of them?
Send your local clerks like flowers or snacks or cookies or something like that. They do so much. It is only just like, there's nothing that clerks won't do to ensure transparency for their community. Chris, I once demoed for a clerk, like she writes minutes after a meeting, right? And she'll include a timestamp of the YouTube video of when they spoke about this particular item.
Interesting.
And I don't know if you've had to do that work where you're going to go into a video on YouTube and you're going to grab that specific link to that specific timestamp. It is a lot of work, and she does it for every meeting.
Wow.
Mind you, there's no statute or regulation or code that dictates something like that, but it is her pure commitment to transparency that drives her to do that for the public. So they, like, clerks really are such amazing, like, brand ambassadors for an organization.
Interesting.
They truly are like the face for local government, and how they even accommodate staff, right? I've listened to clerks that are like, okay, this sounds good, but I don't think our town attorney is going to be able to buy into this. So what can I do? So, for that one member of staff, the clerk understands the importance of the attorney's role in this process. She wants to preserve it and wants to help. So, outside looking in, those civil servants are doing so much every day for the good of the public.
So you're inspiring me to reach out to my local clerk. I know who he is. I think I've met him once, but you're inspiring me to reach out to him and at least show him a little bit of appreciation. So I'm inspired to do so. Rachelle, if you can believe it, we've actually been at this for 50 minutes. I told you this was going to go by quickly. Yeah. Is there anything that you were hoping that I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask you sort of in lightning round fashion, but before I get there, is there anything that you were hoping we would talk about or touch on that maybe we haven't and will be amiss if we don't at least touch on it?
Chris, I think it would be a complete miss if you don't share with me like your most embarrassing demo story. So I know you're like kind of on the other side, right? You're teaching now, you're consulting, but
oh my gosh.
I need to hear like in the trenches.
You want to hear some more? It's funny because my last question for you was going to be, if you could ask me one question, what would it be? But I think you just asked. Oh my gosh, I could tell you so many stories. Early in my career, I did a few of those demos where similar to what you were saying, I was pretty smart at what I did, right? And I knew my stuff pretty well. And I was more than happy to just airdrop in and, sort of talk at people for 30 or 40 minutes without coming up for air. Unfortunately, I had some people around me who pulled me aside and said, look, you're great, but in many cases, people have no idea what you're talking about. And so you need to make it all about them. But a few demo one time there was a period of time in my mid 40s where I was struggling with what's the word I'm looking for when you get dizzy? Why am I drawing a blank?
Vertigo?
Thank you. I was struggling with vertigo, and we were on site. I sold to the DoD. We were on site at a DoD command, and my sales counterpart gave probably a 15, 20, 25 minute presentation. And I was going to give a demonstration literally a minute or two before I was about to quote, take the stage. I had a vertigo spell that lasted about 45 seconds, and I started sweating profusely. And then he turned to me and I literally said, and I sort of just leaned back in my chair and I said, sorry, folks, I literally have just had a vertigo episode and the room is still spinning a little bit and I can't do this. And they were incredibly gracious and got me some water, and I had a tie on, so they let me take my tie off. So that was a moment I'll never forget.
Wow.
I've had the opposite happen. I had a gentleman he didn't have a heart attack, but he had recently had a heart attack. And so we had a medical situation. And we had to stop for that. one time, literally, I clicked into something and my computer not only went completely blue, but the alarm went off on my computer, like this loud alarm went off, and I could not get it to stop. Like literally, I literally had to I had to unplug it and pull the battery out to get it to stop. Needless to say, the demo ended right there. So good Lord, I could go on and on and on. And I think I've shared this. I may have shared this with you or the group when I spoke. The 6 habits that I wrote about and all the mistakes that I talk about, I'm the one who made all the mistakes before I figured out what I shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. So the 6 habits were my solution to all the problems and mistakes that I was making in the field. That's really where the 6 habits were born. And it wasn't until I took over a team of pre-sales consultants, realized that they were making many of the same mistakes that I had made, and realized that, wow, I actually need to create some training for them. And I need to tell them the things that I figured out for myself, because I've made all the mistakes that there are to make. So anyway, long-winded answer, but does that scratch that itch a little bit?
Yeah, that's terrifying, Chris. The vertigo and the blue screen also.
Like I said, I could go on and on. I remember one, literally, I remember one, and this was early in my career. It wasn't a demo, it was a presentation, 60-minute presentation. I was invited in, and I think I prepared 35 slides. And I got in there and I went through 35 slides in 60 minutes. I am pretty sure I did not come up for air once in 60 minutes.
It's a lot of slides, Chris. Lots of slides.
And then it ended, and the customer we got to the end, and the customer was like, all right then, well, that was great. And I guess we'll see you another time. And we left. And my sales colleague and I walked out of there going, okay, we're never ever going to do that again. So yes, I fell on my face more times than I can count. But the good news is I figured it out and did okay. So.
Oh, Chris, let me tell you that reading your book, I've had a lot of moments. So I had the honor of leading our book club discussion on chapter 3, which is the probe, right? And in there, you wrote identifying your competitor. Who's your competitor? Is it a vendor? Is it the status quo? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, because in government, change is really, really hard. When I don't think I've ever encountered a field where, like, Chris, let's say you're director of public works. You know what? When Chris retires, then we can change the process. He's not going to buy into it. So when he retires, like waiting for staff to retire to change your process is something that's very, very common in local government, and something that we've heard. But we spend a lot of time, studying our competitors, where we can shine, where they don't. Yeah. But what if that's not our competition? What if the competition is the staff doesn't want to change? The
do nothing.
I tossed the book. I was like, I need a second. I need a second to process and take notes on this, because that's a whole other monster.
Yeah.
That's a whole other situation to mitigate in a demo situation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, I'd say that's the biggest competitor for all of us is do nothing, right?
Yeah.
So we have to make a compelling case to do, because the truth is that there's a bigger investment in all software purchases than just the cost of the software, right? We have to, it requires process change and change management, and there's lots of other things, right? So very well said. Rachelle, we are 4 minutes away from being at this an hour, if you can believe that. And you've been such a gracious host, and you've been so gracious with your time. By the way, Brian chimed in. Turns out to be one of my best demo sales meetings because of the unexpected informality. Well said. Sounds like you did it. You did it in the coffee shop. Well done, Brian. Thanks for sharing.
That's amazing. I love that story.
Great story. So Rachelle, real quick, first, the best piece of advice you have been given in the past 8 months since you started this profession?
Learn to pivot. Learn to pivot. You can only study your product so much. You can only study a client so much. There's always going to be those curveballs. And you have to know enough. You have to know so much about the product. You have to know enough also.
Yeah.
To pivot. And not just really pivoting to to address a client concern, but also pivoting, towards a path that you can move forward in a demonstration as well.
Yeah.
You talked about the rabbit hole, right? We got to pivot our way out of that rabbit hole so we can move forward in that demonstration.
Yeah. Well said. Any final piece of advice you would give to anyone who may happen to catch this, either in pre-sales or considering pre-sales, anything that you haven't already touched on, any final piece of advice you would give?
If you are contemplating a career change, I know it's scary, but if it's going to be good for you, just do it. Just take the plunge, jump into the deep end, and go for it, because you'll never know what happens. And the what happens could be like this really, really amazing step in your career. And you can meet an award-winning author who puts you on his LinkedIn live. So great things can happen once you take that plunge. So don't be afraid of the change. Very
well said. And you're right. For anyone mid-career, it is scary to make a major change, but life's too short to not enjoy what you do. So, and not that you didn't enjoy what you did, but it seems like you have really sort of flourished and blossomed in this new role. And clearly you have many of the right just personality traits and skills that, put you in a perfect position to succeed. But you've also taken that opportunity by the horns, as they say, and you're well on your way to stardom, if I can use that term as well. So Rachelle, thank you so much for being here. It has been a delight to speak with you. It's been a delight to get to know you. And I hope you'll come back and visit me sometime. In a few years, you'll probably be running pre-sales somewhere, and you'll sort of be a big time, persona in this community is sort of what I'm projecting for you. Folks, if you tuned in, if you're still with us, thanks for hanging around. If you caught the recording, thanks so much for joining. Again, if you like these, you can follow #TechSalesAdvice. We try to do these every Monday at noon. Rachelle, I wish you the very best. Have a great year, and come back and see me next year. Is that a deal?
Absolutely. It's been an honor being your guest today. And in a year, absolutely, I'm putting it on my calendar right now.
Okay, fantastic. It's going to be an annual. Hang around for just a minute. I'm going to give you your parting gift. To everyone else, have a good week, folks. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks all.